Hi, and welcome to the Governance, Law, and Economics lecture series. My name is Derek Yonai, and I'm the director of the Koch Center for Leadership and Ethics at Emporia State University. The Governance, Law, and Economics lecture series is designed to highlight the three institutions that must work together to support and defend a free civil society. Those institutions are good governance, the rule of law, and market-based institutions. For those of you who are familiar with our GLE lecture series, this year we're going to do things just a little bit differently. We're going to record a half-hour lecture from our guest speaker, and then a week after we launch it, we will be having a live Q&A session with them from 6 to 6:30. And we'll have a link for that so you can join us at the end of the video. So again, we're doing things a little bit differently to be able to socially distance and still be able to provide wonderful content for those of you out there. So again, thank you for joining us. Our guest today is Dr. Robert Lawson. Dr. Lawson is the Jerome M. Fullenwider Centennial Chair in Economic Freedom. He is also the director of the Bridwell Institute for Economic Freedom at Southern Methodist University's Cox School of Business. He earned his PhD and MS in Economics from Florida State University and his BS in Economics from the Honors Tutorial College at Ohio University. He has previously taught at Auburn University, Capital University, and Shawnee State University. Dr. Lawson is the founding co-author of the Fraser Institute's Economic Freedom of the World Annual Report, which presents an economic freedom index for over 160 countries. He has authored or co-authored over 100 journal articles, book chapters, policy reports, and book reviews. His research has been cited over 10,000 times, according to Google Scholar. Most recently with Dr. Benjamin Powell, he is a co-author of the Amazon bestseller, Socialism Sucks: Two Economists Drink Their Way Through an Unfree World. Dr. Lawson is a past president of the Association of Private Enterprise Education. He is a senior fellow at the Fraser Institute and a member of the Mount Peleron Society. He's here today to discuss economic freedom. What is it? How do we measure it? And why does it matter?
So what we have here is two really different worldviews. Smith, although no utopian, said free market capitalism, laissez-faire, free trade, it works. It delivers the goods. The wealth of the nation gets higher. And here we have Karl Marx saying, no, it doesn't. It doesn't deliver the goods. It's going to be horrible. That's an interesting debate. It's a debate that has consumed economics, the social sciences, and the big picture for a long time. A lot of this debate is a lot like these two people right here. Now, I like to, when I talk to undergraduate students, I like to recall my days as an undergraduate student. I was at Ohio University, which is #1 on the party school list, so it's not particularly known for its high caliber academics. But I would have arguments with my friends. Most of my friends as an undergrad were socialists. Actually, some of them were communists, and I mean communist. I mean they wore red armbands and marched through campus. And these were my friends, and we would have these arguments. And I would say things, we'd be at party school, we'd be drinking, and I would say things like, we should have freer trade. And they would say, no, we need to protect workers from the vicissitudes of foreign competition or globalization. I would say we should lower taxes. No, we should raise that. They would say we should nationalize the oil industry. And I was like, you're crazy, that'd be horrible. So we would have the debates, and it would be a lot of is and is nots. We should do this. No, we shouldn't. And as the debate would wear on and more alcohol would be consumed, inevitably the name calling would ensue, right? I'd get frustrated and I'd call, you're just a dirty commie pinko. And they would call, you're a greedy bastard capitalist. And at the end of my years at Ohio University, I can count exactly 0 of my friends who I convinced that I was right. And I graduated, and I hadn't changed my views because of these arguments with them either. As enjoyable as those evening drink fests and these political arguments were, as memorable, some of my fondest memories of college involve arguing with my friends. The parts that I can remember, it didn't get anywhere. We didn't learn anything. And it's terribly frustrating. A lot of what passes for political debate and economic conversation in the public sphere is a lot of yelling and name calling. There's a lot of heat, but there's not a lot of light. I'd like to contrast that with what goes on in the natural sciences. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I'm a little bit of a frustrated physicist. And there are deep and fundamental differences between the social sciences and natural sciences, so you can't push this metaphor too far. But in the natural sciences, there are fundamental arguments and debates that go on, just like in the social sciences. One group of scholars, physicists, may have a particular view of something, another group will have a view, and these views are inconsistent with each other. And they'll fight and they'll stake their careers on one set of ideas being correct versus the other. But at the end of the day, how do we settle this? We go to the lab, we conduct an experiment. We gather observational data in the case of astrophysics. We do everything we can to try to evaluate the consistency of the natural world with our views of how the natural world works. And when the evidence we have, when the evidence we get from the observation of the stars or from the experiments at CERN in Switzerland or whatever, when those observations are different from what we expect, we have to throw out those ideas. And who can deny the world we live in, where we are living this magic that is happening all around us? I don't know how this thing works. This magic is happening on the screen. I mean, we are living. We're benefiting, you and I, from this immense knowledge about how the natural world works. And the reason we've learned all this is because we've applied, the scientific method and so on. I don't want to romanticize it. It's not nearly as clean as we teach it in junior high, but it really does work. In the social sciences, too often, not just economics, but political science, the other social science, all we do is yell and scream at each other, and we never bother to get outside and look at the evidence. So that brings me to this economic freedom debate. Smith said economic freedom works. Karl Marx said, no, it doesn't. We can argue about this until we're blue in the face, but I would suggest we act like natural scientists. The first step to do so, though, is to try to measure economic freedom. So I, along with my colleague Jim Gortney, who's at Florida State, began working on a project called the Economic Freedom of the World Project. And the idea is to try to put a number, try to put a measurement on how economically free a country is. The country is going to be our unit of analysis. You may think that sounds hard, put a number on economic freedom. Freedom's not exactly the most narrowly defined term. It's kind of fuzzy. But we put numbers on things that are hard to measure all the time. I'm sure if you teach economics, you have taught about gross domestic product. GDP, the dollar value of all the new final goods and services produced in the United States in a year. That's at least a B+ definition of GDP. And when I used to teach undergrads, I remember teaching GDP. Here's what GDP is. Give them the definition, blah blah blah, and then I would spend the rest of the whole class, like 50 minutes of the class, I would spend telling them all the things we do that are wrong. GDP doesn't measure this and it should, or it measures this and it shouldn't. All the problems associated with the measurement of GDP. We know that GDP, in fact, is a pretty bad measure of the output of the country. But we do it anyway, don't we? And next year, guess what? We're going to do it again. And the idea is that even a bad measure, if consistently done over time, can yield us some good information about the world we live in. I feel the same way about estimating economic freedom. So the idea is to try to put a number on how close to Adam Smith you are. In my head, I sometimes think of this as the Adam Smith index. This is the what would Adam Smith do index. Now, I won't bore you with all the methodological details. If you look at the copy of the book, which I didn't bring with me, it's literally just pages and pages of numbers. It's the most boring book ever written. It is a data-driven exercise. That is to say, we collect data on the economic systems and policies in the current index, we have 157 countries. And we have data for many countries all the way back to 1970. So it's a very long, large country data set, and also from a time dimension, we go back quite a few years. Now, I think in 1970, we only had 58 countries, but as time goes on, we get more. And there's 42 variables in the index. So we've got 42 variables, 157 countries, data back to 1970. One of my computer program guys says there's something like 250,000 numbers in this whole array of data that we construct. And I won't bore you with the details. I think it's best to think of this index in 5 broad areas. So this is sort of what would Adam Smith do in 5 broad areas. And these 42 variables that we use are actually collected and put into one of these 5 areas. So let me just sort of briefly remark on what goes into the index, and then we'll talk about the numbers themselves. Size of government. What would Adam Smith do? Okay. Well, he wrote a chapter on the role of government, the size of government. It's pretty easy, actually. Government, according to Adam Smith, should, number one, have some cops. Pay for the cops. You need to have some courts, some judges, because sometimes people steal each other's cows, and we need a judge to decide whose cows belong to whom. Settle contract disputes, civil disagreements, and so on. We need some roads and bridges. Adam Smith had an early understanding of what today we would call public goods. So roads and bridges were in his chapter. And although he, being the kind of capitalist guy he was, he said they should be toll roads and toll bridges, but he was okay with the government getting involved in the financing of some types of public works, infrastructure type works today, as we call them. Then he says we should maybe do some schools, although he was a little bit ambivalent there because he himself had a horrible experience at Oxford and wasn't terribly enamored with the type of institutional, publicly funded schools that he had experienced. So that's, and by the way, so we got courts, cops, roads, bridges, and some schools, and then the chapter's over. And you're like, what do you mean? Where's the Social Security? Where's the Food and Drug Administration? Where is, the city of Dallas owns a hotel. Rick and I own a hotel. I know, I've been in the Omni once, exactly. So why is it, was running hotels on Adam Smith's list of things? No, that's, so he had a very small, circumscribed, by today's standards, borderline anarchic view of what government should do. I mean, he makes Rand Paul look like a communist in the comparison, right? So a very small government. That's what Adam Smith did do. Now, you may think government should be bigger than that, but I'm just telling you, this is what Adam Smith's system of natural liberty entailed, a very small government. So in Area 1, we've got various measures of size of government. They're mostly fiscal numbers, spending numbers on different types of things. We do have one measure of marginal income tax rates. We cram all that in, and we get numbers in Area 1. Area 2 is legal structure and property rights. Adam Smith didn't speak a lot about this in the English context. It was sort of taken for granted that you had a good legal structure. English common law, sort of, even to this day, is considered the gold standard for at least civil law. And, but we have measures in this area, and actually it's hard to measure how good are the courts, how efficient are the property rights systems, and how easy is it to transfer property from one person to another, are the judges corrupt, or these kinds of things are really hard to measure, but we measure them with 9 variables from 3 different sources, and they're all a little soft, they're all survey type questions, but to give you one example, I'll give you 2 examples. One is the World Economic Forum, which is this group in Davos, Switzerland, you may have heard of. Whenever they have their big famous meeting in Davos, it's always on CNN and so on. They do a survey of business people, and one of the things they ask in that survey is, how corrupt are the judges? It's very simple, and it's a survey. And they ask business people this all over the world, hundreds and thousands of people. And so we get some information from that. We also get some more information from the World Bank. They have a measure of how many days it takes to settle a simple contract dispute. So if Seralde, if I gave Seralde $5 to wash my car, but because he's a flake, he decides to take my $5 and go to the bar with it and not wash my car, I sue him. And so the question the World Bank asks is, for a really simple contract dispute where someone has failed to satisfy the terms of a contract, how long is it going to take to settle that? How long is it going to take for the court to make Daniel give me my money back or whatever? In the United States, I think they say it's 1 year. That's what they estimate. A simple contract dispute would go through the system in about a year. Okay, so I got information like that. That's Area 2. Area 3 is sound money. Another way in which your property can be taken from you, we think about taxes is one way your money gets taken from you. Another way in which your property can be taken from you is through inflation. Monetary economists call it the inflation tax. I like to tell the story here about my dad. When I was 16, I just got my driver's license, and my dad told me, he says, all right, son, and my dad and I did not have a lot of heart-to-hearts. There's some family history there. Anyway, he said, son, take a $100 bill, which is a huge amount of money in the mid-'80s, right? Take a $100 bill and fold it up and hide it in your wallet. And this is like, I don't know this is like bail money or get out of jail, I don't know, bribe money, whatever. And so dutifully I put that in there. And then you know how it goes. You forget about it. A year goes by and you're cleaning out your wallet and you find that. That's a great day, isn't it? A great day when you find that. You know what I'm talking about? But here's the problem, of course. I put that dollar bill in a year ago and I take it out a year later. What's the problem when I take it to the store? It's not worth $100. Well, it still looks like $100. It's physically a $100 bill, but it's going to buy it's going to buy fewer goods and services a year later than it did a year before. We all know this is basically inflation. And if inflation was 5% this year, it's just like someone took $5 out of my wallet. Like if I put $5 in my wallet and there's 5% inflation, and a year later I pull that $100 out of my wallet, it's like someone stole $5 from me. It's like it just disappeared. Again, economists call this the monetary or the inflation tax. So that's the kind of thing. And of course, governments are pretty much in control of monetary affairs and inflation. So we have some measures of inflation. We actually have some other measures. For example, we measure in this area whether you're allowed to own a foreign currency bank account. So can you go down to Chase Bank and open an account measured in euro or English pounds or something? Of course, we can do this. It's perfectly legal for you in the United States to do this. You can also open a dollar account or a euro account in England if you wanted to. So we as Americans have the legal right, to open currency bank accounts in currencies besides US dollars. But this is actually in a lot of countries, this is not legal. In Venezuela, for example, you are not allowed to open a dollar account in a Caracas bank or in Miami. It's not legal to do so. Okay. So that's the third area. The fourth area is Adam Smith's area, right? That's the free trade area. He was this crazy Scotsman arguing that the people of England should trade freely with the people of France. This was an audacious argument. The idea that people should trade with their enemies is still an audacious argument to this day. We seem to have trouble with buying Mexican tomatoes. I keep reading these stories about people being upset about Mexican tomatoes coming to America. I love tomatoes. I don't care where they came from myself, but apparently some people are really upset about that. So in this area, we've got measures of tariffs, quotas, non-tariff barriers, capital controls, all the kind of impediments, all the kind of things that people put on trade. We had a little bit of a discussion about this earlier. Someone, I forget who I was talking to, someone asked me about the trade question and someone mentioned what happens during wars. You know, one of the things about what happens when you have a war with someone, what's the first thing you do? You blockade them, right? Because you know that trade helps them. So in a war, you want to hurt your enemy, right? So you blockade the coast. You don't let things go in. Well, what are tariffs and quotas doing? It's like we're putting up our own blockade, right? So I mean, if you ever question the logic of free trade, just ask yourself, what does your enemy do to you in a war? They try to stop stuff from coming into your country because they know when stuff comes into your country, that's helping your country. All right? See, anyway, that's a little thing that came up during the break I thought was pretty interesting. The last area is regulation. It's a big area. I think we have 13 variables in this area. It kind of is a hodgepodge of different ad hoc regulations. In the case of credit markets, we've got a measure of interest rate controls, controls on the movement of interest rates on bank accounts. We've got, in the labor market area, we've got some labor market regulations like how hard it is to hire or fire a worker, which is some data we get from the World Bank. The minimum wage is in there. The minimum wage is a very popular law in the United States and most countries. But it's an infringement on economic freedom. It prevents people from contracting at prices they might otherwise want to contract at. And let's see, the other thing, the business area, we've got like how many days does it take to start a business? The World Bank also measures how many days it takes to start a business. They go all around the world, and they go through the thought experiment of starting a very simple business in terms of the legal red tape. And in the United States, they estimate it's 30 days. It takes 30 days, according to the World Bank, to start a business. Okay. So all these 42 variables, I use an extremely advanced branch of mathematics called arithmetic to convert the raw numbers that I get from the World Bank and the IMF and the WEF and all these other sources into zeros and tens. And so 10 is Adam Smith. That's what Adam Smith would do. And 0 is the opposite of that. I guess maybe that's what Karl Marx would do. I don't know. But it's Adam Smith is high, okay? And I'll spare you the 25 pages of fine print algebra that tells you how all the math is done. Screwed it up. I was going to ask who number 1 is, but you all just saw who number 1 is. Who's number 1? Okay, Hong Kong's number 1. Michael Cox always yells at me, Hong Kong's not a country. Well, they got a GDP and their own money supply. That counts as a country. Hong Kong is number one, and I really didn't need to do this index to know that Hong Kong was number one in the world. If you think about the size of government, the top income tax rate in Hong Kong is 15%. That's what rich people pay. It's capped. You cannot pay more than 15%. In the United States, depending on what state you live in, the top tax rate would approach 50%. In some states, it's going to be even higher than that. In France, it's now, I think it's down to 60% in France. Okay. Singapore, pretty similar. Hong Kong, let's see. If I had to sue Daniel Seralde, and I had a choice of suing him in a Hong Kong court or a Texas court, with all due respect to my Texas jurists, I would rather end up in a Hong Kong court. They are renowned. The whole world goes to Hong Kong to settle contract disputes. It's actually one of the biggest private arbitration centers in the planet, because obviously all the people doing commerce in China, they don't want to settle a dispute in China. So they sign their contracts to settle those disputes in Hong Kong. Hong Kong actually imports judges at their highest courts level. They import judges from New Zealand and Australia and England because they want to tell the world how good and secure their legal system is. No real problems with inflation in Hong Kong. They're tied to the U.S. dollar on a currency union, so I should maybe say there's no problems yet with problem. What's the tariff rate in Hong Kong? Yeah, there are no tariffs. It actually is Adam Smith free trade. There are no tariffs or customs duties at all on any product, period, in Hong Kong. They do have a customs office. I have this vision of this guy who stands there with a clipboard and he asks you, what's in the containers? Teddy bears from China. He writes it down, and they keep track, but there are essentially no tariffs or quotas or customs duties in Hong Kong. Their capital markets are essentially open. They have a couple capital controls, but it's basically one of the most open capital environments, investment environments as well. Lastly, what about regulation? They just created a minimum wage. I know. It's $2 an hour. So it's essentially symbolic. Average income in Hong Kong is higher than average income in the United States. So a $2 an hour minimum wage essentially is not binding on anyone in the labor market. But it was sort of a symbolic thing. The World Bank, how many days does it take to start a business? So the very same question, how many days does it take to start a business in the United States? It was 30 days. How many days in Hong Kong does the World Bank say? 1. And I think it's noon. I don't think it's a whole day. I think you can do it before lunch. This is no joke, actually. There's this journalist, used to be on 2020, John Stossel. And he actually went to Hong Kong, and he started a business, and it took him 1 day. I mean, the legal red tape. Now, bear in mind, the business that the World Bank is trying to start here is not a nuclear power plant or anything elaborate. It's just a simple business. But the red tape is pretty insignificant. By the way, for contrast, in Egypt, the last time I looked, it took 3,000 days and 42 procedures. 42 procedures. So you got to go to 42 offices. You got to get them. I'm sure you have to do them in exactly one order. If you mess up an order, you got to go back to, it's like Chutes and Ladders. You got to go all the way back probably. And that's like 8 years or something. I mean, no one in his right mind starts a legal business in Egypt. You probably bribe your way through the process to shorten it, or you just start the business illegally without the right paperwork, or you just don't start a business at all. You just go do something else. So those are the kinds of things. So anyway, Hong Kong is number one. Easy call. If any other country had come out first, I would have known we screwed up the math somewhere along the way. Singapore is very similar. This does afford me the opportunity to mention that this is an economic freedom index. There are other elements to this freedom story besides economic life. Economic life, the buying and selling, investing, hiring and firing aspect of life, which is a very important part of life. But there's also the part of life where I worship the God of my choice in the manner of my choosing. There's also the freedom to speak my mind and tell jokes about the president. I love telling jokes about the president. All of them. I don't care who they are. I like jokes. All right. So freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom to politically participate. Those are very, very important freedoms. I'm using my freedom of speech right now. This index is fairly silent on those dimensions. It's not because we don't think those things are important. It's because we think other people are doing really good jobs of measuring political rights, civil liberties, and political participation. And there are groups like Freedom House in New York, which does excellent work. They've been doing it for four decades. Excellent group. So we have good measures of these things. We didn't have a good measure of when we started this project. We didn't think there was a good measure of economic freedom. So that's why this project is fairly narrowly focused on that thing. Singapore, therefore, is a kind of an interesting case. Hong Kong is to an extent as well. Singapore is not the world's greatest liberal democracy. It is a bad idea in Singapore to criticize the ruling party in public. If you do that, you will, as they say in Asia, it's career limiting. And that's a problem for Singapore. I wouldn't want to live in a place like that. So I wouldn't want to live there. But if you want to hire and fire, import or export, keep most of your paycheck in your own pocket as opposed to giving it to the government, Singapore is actually pretty great. Just don't criticize the government. So they're kind of schizophrenic. They let you a lot of freedom in one area, but they don't give you a lot of freedom in the other area. And you'll see that also with countries like United Arab Emirates, which is also very high. There's no income tax in there. And if you look at the rest of the sort of top group of countries, you're going to see countries that you probably would say, oh, those are the market countries. Those are the, the capitalist countries, Canada, United Kingdom. These are the relatively market-oriented nations, Australia and so on. I will mention, for those of you who think this is a Democrat or Republican thing, at least half of that decline from 8.65 to 7.73, at least half of it occurred under a certain Republican president who may or may not be a short distance from where we stand. This index is quite, it's quite bulletproof, I guess, to politics. If a Republican screws up, it'll capture it just as much as if a Democrat. And the flip side of that, the index is pretty good at capturing good movements when they come from left-wing governments. It's actually quite surprising. Before I go on, show some other countries and talk about the bigger results. We are 2 years behind. It takes about 2 years for the data to get to me. So I do, like I use the physics metaphor there. It's like my star is 2 light years away and it takes 2 years to get to my office. But by the time the World Bank gets their numbers in, publishes them in their book, I get their numbers, publishing in mine, it takes about 2 years. So anyone who says in a study of this type, they're giving you contemporaneous numbers like for today's world, they're pretty much lying to you because everybody is looking about 2 years, half year and a half, 2 years back. That's the way it is in this business. I got 4 more charts and then I'll shut down and we can have a few questions and Rick will yell time when time is up. At the end of the day, this is the chart that Milton Friedman, this is a name drop, I'm sorry, but Milton Friedman says when he saw that, it was one of the most powerful things he's ever seen, which is a huge compliment to me. He said this is one of the most powerful charts he's ever seen. This is the blue, green, yellow, and red quartiles, simple correlation perhaps, but nevertheless quite instructive. This is GDP per capita measured in purchasing power parity. It's the best measure of living standards we have. It's about $40,000 in the blues, about $7,000 in the reds. It's not a surprise. Now, this is not a surprise to anyone who's a free market capitalist, but it also would not be a surprise to anyone who is a Karl Marxian Marxist, communist. Because even Karl Marx knew that capitalism was productive, right? But Karl Marx said, yeah, but all the stuff goes to the rich and nothing goes to the poor, and the problem with capitalism is the inequality. Well, here's a measure of inequality. This is the income share of the bottom 10% from the World Bank. The poorest 10% of the population. Take 100 people, take the poorest 10 of them. What portion of all of the income did that 10% get? I don't know about what you see there, but I see about 2, 2.5, maybe 3% across the board. I see a horizontal line there. Whether you're in a red, yellow, green, or a blue country, you have the bottom 10% getting about 2.5% of income across the board. Varies a little bit. If you look at the individual country data, you'll see a couple countries like the Swedens of the world, it might be 3.5%, a little high. If you see the really unequal countries like the Colombias of the world, it might be, 1.5. But you're going to see across the world a very tight band of inequality. But what you're not going to see is any correlation between economic freedom and inequality. Right? I think it's the greatest myth that we let people get away with, is we let people say capitalism causes too much inequality. It is certainly not evident in the cross-country data that we have from this index. It simply isn't true. 2 more charts and I'll be finished. This is the income, not the income share of the bottom 10%, but this is the income level of the bottom 10%. And it really mirrors the first graph, but it's a nice one. The average person in the bottom 10% of the income distribution in a blue country has $10,000. $10,000 is not a lot of money. I wouldn't want to live on it. But $10,000 is a lot more than $1,600, which is what the average poor person has in actual dollars in a red country. So the absolute treatment of the poor, the absolute treatment of the bottom of the income distribution is vastly better in more economically free countries. My favorite graph is this one. For one, all the other ones were measured in dollars, or they had something to do with dollars. This is life expectancy from birth. The nice thing about life expectancy is we have very good data on life expectancy. I will freely admit that there's only about 100 countries worth of data in this chart, but in this chart I think I have 157. I got all the countries. So it's all there. 17-year difference. If you live to be 80 years old, you get to live long enough to see your grandkids. You get to see your grandkids grow up. You probably get to see your grandkids get married and have kids of their own. My daughter, she's 20 years old. She has a close relationship with two of her great-grandparents. My grandparents are still living. This may have something to do with the very short generations in the Lawson family tree, but nevertheless, that's a treasure. My grandparents, her great-grandparents, they know a 20-year-old adult great-grandchild. That's a treasure that we ought to celebrate. Most human beings who've ever lived on this planet barely got to see their grandkids, much less their great-grandkids. Certainly not to get to see them grow up. That's crazy talk. We now live in a world where many of us, most of us, are going to live long enough to have a really good shot of having a relationship with our grandkids as adults, and maybe our great-grandkids as adults. That's really freaking cool. And we ought to celebrate the hell out of that, because it's not normal on this planet for human beings to have that pleasure. The thing is, it only really happens in the blue countries. I mean, you got to get enough economic freedom, and you got to get enough income, and to live long enough. If you're not in one of those countries, it's odds are you're not going to have that experience. I'm going to skip that. I'll plug our website. We have a website. You can go to the O'Neill Center website, of course, o'neillcenter.org, but we have a couple websites that are devoted to the project itself.